Welcome back to i24 News Morning Edition. We're on to another subject here in Israel. Real estate prices are still rocket high in Israel's main cities, and there are some that are thinking of alternative towns and cities, or simply establishing new villages in Israel's Negev Desert in the south or in the Galilee in the north. The Ayalim Association was founded in 2002 with the goal of strengthening these existing communities in these areas and social involvement, and also establishing student and entrepreneur villages. This young social entrepreneurship fosters a connection between people and land, as well as between the individual and greater society. To hear more about it, we're joined now in studio by Partnership Director at the Ayalim Movement, Effy Rubin. Good morning, Effy. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So obviously I took it to the my own perspective, which is, of course, the rocket high prices in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, in parts of Haifa as well. And therefore, there's also that kind of economic connection to live in places that are not as developed, perhaps.
True. Currently, we're building a new student village in Sderot, and we're doing it out of recycled shipping containers,
Wow.
which are between 30 and 40% less expensive to build and 80% less in time. So yes, in that aspect, we are able to build much cheaper and to allow cheaper prices for people to live in.
But it's not only about the prices, right? The Ayalim Association also has an ideology and so forth.
Definitely.
And there's the people that are running it, you included. Your motive for doing this is completely ideological and not maybe economical.
True. We are trying to build Israel's periphery, living Ben-Gurion's dream of transforming Israel's periphery into a place to live in. And we're doing this through establishment of student villages. Our goal is to bring young, educated Israelis to live in these peripheral areas.
But isn't that the job of the government? I mean, you mentioned Ben-Gurion. He was of course, the father of the state of Israel. His vision was a vision that the government was going to do it. It wasn't a vision of a lone person.
Yet 60 years later,
right.
It's still unsettled. But we
Why
believe
is that, by the way, in your opinion?
There are many challenges. You mentioned housing. There's hardly any houses in these areas. Jobs is a problem as well. Opportunity in general. But we're seeing a shift where we are able to bring more and more young Israelis who have high Zionist motivation, who want to do good to these areas, and they're moving, and they're having a better life quality in these areas.
You mentioned jobs, which is, of course, something that will come to mind when people even, decide where to live in and build a house, build a family, and so forth. What kind of jobs are available, and is that something that the Ayalim Association tries to connect between the people that are moving to these areas and finding them employment?
We are focused more on the students, so it's less about jobs, but definitely you're seeing a shift in Israel towards the south. The army is relocating to the south, opening many opportunities in these areas. Beersheba is becoming a big city with many opportunities. So yes, there are more and more jobs opportunities in these areas as well. And the more young people comes, that also creates a market.
Right. How long do these people stay? So we have how many students today? In
Ayalim?
Yeah.
We have about 1,000
wow.
students and pre-army volunteers, and we're growing. Now we're building this village in Sderot. It's going to be home for 300 more students.
And how long do these people stay in the south?
For 3 years, during their bachelor's. 3 years.
And will they then opt to stay longer? Say, this has become our home, and now we want to actually live here?
We are building student villages, hoping that after having a great experience after 3 years, they will decide to stay permanently and make their homes there. That's our final goal. Many of our students stay.
And did you start off as a student in these villages?
Yes.
Where were you? Tell me your story.
I started in Ayalim. Back then, today we have 12 student villages. Ayalim was our first village. And we were in the south, in the Negev. And we were a few young Israelis with a great dream. And 12 years after that, we have 12 student villages, 10 alumni villages, and we are growing, and our message is getting out.
How cheap is it for a student to live in a Ayalim village versus paying rent to a landlord and having to deal with the bureaucracy of city municipalities and so forth?
We believe in volunteering. So each student in our organization volunteers 500 hours annually. So we need to provide them with cheap housing and with their tuition so they could have the time for that. So they don't pay much. It's like $150 per month per student.
Wow.
Which allows you to volunteer and do good in these areas. Now we're moving
and
to
food and so forth and logistics.
Just as any other students, you buy your food, you live in an apartment, you can cook, you buy.
And would you say that the Ayalim Association, in order to grow, and we mentioned the lack of government involvement, needs what now? What's the next step for Ayalim to grow? Does it need more money? Does it need maybe recognition from the government? Has there been recognition?
The government has been our partner and increasingly is our partner. At the moment, we started building more villages for our alumni, but not only, for young Israelis who want to move to these areas after they're students. And our greater mission here, our greater goal, is to demonstrate to the government and to other agencies, to the market basically, that many Israelis would move to these areas if we allow them, by creating jobs, you mentioned, and creating housing for them to move to. So we're, in a way, we're the catalyst for the market to come after us.
And obviously, there is an ideological aspect. You mentioned Zionism and Ben-Gurion, but it's also, and as I mentioned, my big perspective on this was an economical, financial aspect. Are there other places around the world that you've maybe seen as a prototype for the Ayalim Association? Places, you know, that students and young people such as yourself decide we're going to take the initiative and build?
We're more and more hear from other countries who want to copy our model.
Really?
We came with this model ourselves. We were trying to think of a method that would enable young Israelis to move to these areas. And the idea of working with students, we believe at this stage of life, you can still make changes. So more and more we hear from other countries of copying this model we came up with. You
mentioned Sderot. Of course, the Sderot is in the news for many other reasons, unfortunately. And that is my question. You know, you're building on these frontiers of Israel's borders. Sderot is just one of them, but a lot of the Negev was in the eye of rocket fire. Operation Protective Edge is still not over. Are these student villages reinforced, and can you ensure security?
I mentioned we're building out of shipping containers. But
that doesn't sound so secure to me.
It's not that secure, but each 2 units share a bomb shelter. But Sderot, we mentioned Israel's periphery, which is suffering from negative net migration. So Sderot, on top of that, is also dealing with 13, 14 years of being under fire. So we're trying to help the society there by bringing young Israelis to live there.
And where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
As a movement?
As a movement.
More and more dealing with the next stage, after students, with alumni villages, and bringing other Israelis to these areas. And families,
you start with families. That's you know, have people get married within these villages and make.
You see, many of our students have found love within.
There you go. See, I knew it.
It happens.
Thank you very much, Effy, for joining us. Stay with us. We're now.